Hi everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of ELI on Air. My name is Miriam Brousseau, and I am the ELI Talks Program Director. I'm very happy to be here today with Gary Hartstein, who's the Director of the Digital J-Learning Network, and with our special guest, Rabbi Yisroel Boruch Sufrin, who is the head of school at Harkham Hillel Hebrew Academy, and is going to be speaking with us today about blended learning and Jewish values and how maybe they're not quite as at odds as one may think. In fact, there's some really interesting synergies to explore here. And just before we jump in, I'll remind everyone that this is an interactive broadcast. We'll be taking your questions throughout and answering at the end. So if you care to submit those questions, you can do so through Google+. If you're signed into your Google account and you're watching the video now, you can see in the lower left-hand corner of your screen there's a little black box with some yellow writing. If you click on that, it will open up the screen it will open up a new tab in which you can submit your questions through the Q&A app right here in Google Hangouts. You can also submit your questions via Twitter using hashtag EliTalks, E-L-I Talks, and we will be taking those throughout, and we're very excited to have you all here with us to continue this conversation and really dig into both blended learning and some real rich, meaty Jewish texts. And so with that, I turn it over to our eminent presenter, to Rabbi Sufrin, to kick it off for us. Thanks so much, Rabbi Sufrin.
So hello everyone. We're going to, actually what I'd like to be able to do is to talk about some of the qualities of blended learning in the relationship to a Jewish day school environment. And some of those things actually transcend into a general school environment, not only in a Jewish day school environment. But in order to get there, what I'd like to do just for a few moments is talk about the realities and the challenges that come to mind. And not knowing where each one of us participating may be in the image of challenges. Some of us may not have any challenges at all with technology or blended learning or integrating technology. And some of us may have some larger challenges or bigger challenges. And some of our challenges may be on a spiritual level, or what we call the guilty challenge, meaning I really don't have the answer, but I'm doing it because I need to do it, or culture tells me to do it, but I have that tinge of guilt in me because I'm just not sure. I really don't really see the light as to how it fits into my culture and how it fits into the way that I think, or the way that we've been brought up, or whether it's a religious level or a cultural level where I am. So what I want to actually start with, and if we can go to the first slide. What I wanted to actually start with, and we can move right into the next one, which is the idea of the challenges. And these are the challenges that sometimes come to mind. We have, where do I fit into the picture? What happens to me? What happens to my role when we have a new tool, or something new in our toolbox that we're able to use? Where do I fit into it? Where does it fit? Where do we blend together? Not in the sense of blended learning, just in the sense of blending the pieces together. We have the religious question, which we can't avoid because it's all over the place. Is it kosher? That's the ongoing question we always seem to ask ourselves. Anything new, we have to look at and say, is it kosher? Is it kosher spiritually? Is it kosher just on a base level? Is this something we should be doing? Is it something we should be using? And then this leads some of us to deal with the issue of dealing with change. When is change allowed? When is change not allowed? There are times when it seems to be change is verboten. We just can't do it. And sometimes we find that change is embraced. So how do we know is technology and is blended learning, is that something to be embraced? Is it one of those changes that we're quote unquote allowed to do? And then if we bring it into the world of education, we bring it into the world of parenting, what happens to my role as a teacher? What happens to my role as an educator? What happens to my role as a parent? If I'm bringing something in that is going to change the paradigm, if I'm bringing something in that's going to change the conversation, something that's going to be so transformative that all of a sudden things are changing, skills are changing. How do we deal with those roles? And then, of course, we can't ignore the challenge of Masorah. We are such a, we're built, it's built into us, it's ingrained in us, this concept of passing from generation to generation, the traditions. Where does technology and blended learning fit into the Masorah Halacha? And then perhaps deepest then, anything that's new seems to bring with it a whole set of challenges in terms of safety. And we, in the world of technology, safety is really high on the concern button, especially when we look at the news and especially when we see what can be done with technology, things that were so hard to have had access to all of a sudden become so easily accessible to us. How do we deal with these protections and these walls? And again, as I said before, if none of these are issues for any of us participating today, then just going through them very quickly and just addressing these as an introduction to the actual sources that I'd like to be able to bring from Jewish sources so that we can look at these things from an intellectual and academic and a meaningful way. So this will serve as an introduction to be able to get into there. So before we go on, we've been dealing with the challenges that we have in terms of ourselves and the hurdles we may need to cross, each one of us at our own level. There is one item that I'd like to bring in as a challenge, and that's the next slide, but this is a different type of challenge. It's where I see that technology has a value, and if I don't use it, then I almost have a disability in the sense that I'm missing a tool, such a valuable tool. And this sort of enhances the challenge, because if I need it so critically, then how am I supposed to live with it, or how am I supposed to live without it? So this happens to be actually an educational challenge that was brought up on one of the listservs, actually through Luxed from Bar-Ilan. And somebody's posting on behalf of a colleague who was working in a principal at a school that had taken the stand that there is no technology. And they're at a loss that they're unable to reach students that have a difficult time learning. And I want to point out two things over here. Number one, there is this sense that technology naturally addresses the needs of those who have difficulty. But the reality is, we can enhance the question because there are many students who don't have quote-unquote difficulties in learning, and perhaps we are holding back opportunities from them. So the visuals we tend to say is an issue. What we tend to forget is an issue is that gifted child, or the child who is capable of doing more. And by not offering them these opportunities, we're actually holding them back. So the question, this educational challenge is not only a challenge for the child that is not allowed to have technology, not allowed to use technology because of a particular approach, and how do we deal with that child who has issues in terms of the learning issues, but how do we give a fair chance and a fair shake to children that deserve more of an opportunity, and perhaps they're being held back and we're withholding something from them. And so therefore what we've come to see is it's worth our while for a moment just to look at some of the options, what one can do with technology. And let me remind everybody, I'm not here today to talk about solutions or how to use technology in the classroom. I'm just using these as examples of how far you can take technology in a blended learning environment, or how far you can go and the opportunities we can give our children and our students in a learning environment that integrates and embraces technology. And by looking at these options, it enhances the challenge for us. How do we deal with the issue from a Jewish perspective, and how do we deal with the issue just from a perspective of a generation that didn't grow up having all of these tools. So I'm going to actually steal some ideas that here in the school where I am at Harkham Hillel Hebrew Academy, where some of our teachers are actually using some apps and ideas that are solving problems, and not only solving educational challenges, but actually opening up vistas of opportunities that were never there before for the students. And I specifically did not focus on the general studies because that almost goes without saying that's going to happen. I've specifically chosen examples how some of these tools and some of these options are being actually used in Judaic studies classes, by Judaic studies rabbis, mechanchim and mechanchot, where they've been able to integrate technology as a critical part of the learning process, enhancing the ability of the students to be able to learn, explore, and discover, which is such a critical component of the Jewish learning experience as well. So I'm going to give credit, and here we're on the next slide. We're going to go through a series of 2 or 3 slides that are going to show you some options. Many of you who are participating are already using them, know how to use them. I'm not going to give a shiur or a session or a discussion today on how to use them. I just want to show you some of the items that are being used by some of my teachers. Rabbi Swigard, Rabbi Kellingsberg, and Rabbi Wagshall in particular are the ones that share these, are the ones that use these almost on a daily basis in their class. So I want to give them credit for not only using them but allowing me to share some of these ideas. But these are just some quick examples. The Power Safer is the huge library of text. The Quizlet is the flashcards and the vocabulary, but the Sketch actually allows us to annotate and image pictures or text as they come up, allowing us to distinguish between various opinions that appear in a Mishnah or various opinions that appear in a Gemara. And what it does is it allows us to highlight differences and allow people to compare and contrast. And it's not only the teacher who's doing it, but what it does is it gives the student the opportunity. And we're going to get to that in a moment, because what's perhaps one of the greatest benefits of this of integrating technology and a blended learning environment is that all of a sudden we're going to find students taking over the learning process. And that is one of the key challenges that many of us are going to have, and we're going to address that issue head on. We're not going to avoid it. So if we go to the next slide, many of you are probably familiar with Nearpod, and we call it here a presentation on steroids. It's for high-quality review sessions. The teacher actually here controls all the iPads. So for those of us that are worried about groups actually all being focused on the same area, the Nearpod actually allows some of that element of control to take place within the classroom. And many teachers actually love that just because of that feature in and of itself. And if we move to the next slide, there is a word that my staff used and they invented in relation to using Schoology called awesomeness, which is this is an opportunity for teacher interaction with students, messaging and collaboration in an extremely safe environment. And here we see how we're offering the students opportunities to use that which they used to using on a daily basis and use it in a way where it's actually useful in the learning process. And if we very quickly go to the next slide, we're all familiar with the YouTube and the Animoto, which gives the students the ability to see trigger videos and also create trigger videos and see their artwork, so to speak, in action and live. And if we can go to the next slide very quickly, EduCanon is a big favorite because EduCanon allows us to take a video and, you know, those old-fashioned passive videos and experiences that happen. And what it allows you to do, and it allows the classroom to do, it allows the educator to do, is it can be stopped. And you can then stop and ask a series of questions and resume the video. And those answers are reported to the teacher. So it actually is a way to engage the students in watching the video and seeing. So I like to say this takes away the passive part of the learning process that may tend to take place in a video environment, in a video type of environment. So these are just options of how far you can go, and many of us participating already know this and probably have other options as well that you're utilizing or you know of and that are successful in different areas. I just am highlighting them to enhance the need for us to address this issue of blended learning and technology integration from a Jewish perspective, because look how much we can give our students, and look at the opportunities we can create, and look at the culture of learning that we can generate, and look at the engagement that we can create for our students in these environments if we can find a way to utilize them, and also if we can find it in our conscience to understand that it's not only what we call in Hebrew b'diavad, because I have to, because it's culturally acceptable, because this is what the kids are living, and this is the life we're living in. No, it's beyond that. It's because it's a critical element of the educational process that if we leave it out, and if we leave these opportunities out, we're actually withholding from our students that which they deserve. They deserve the best, and this is what's going to happen if we can open these opportunities for them. This is not taking away anything from the traditional book learning and the traditional skills. All we're doing is we're enhancing and we're changing the paradigm. We're changing the terms for 21st century education, 21st century skills. And with that in mind, there is one more slide that I'd like to show, which I'd like to bring up, which many of you are probably familiar with again, that really this is the exclamation point. This is the bolding of the issue. This is the underlining of the issue. And this is what we call, and we use this very much over here in our school. When we work with the teachers, and especially new educators that are joining this type of culture, and as we started to work with the staff in having them take ownership of this approach to education and engaging students. And this we call the SAMR model. The SAMR model is substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. So there are, in general, very quickly, there are two ways that you can look at technology. You can look at it as an enhancer. It's another tool that enhances the educational experience, and there is value to that. There is sometimes value in bringing in a variety of different means and methods in order to keep the learning keep the students stimulated and create a stimulating environment and an engaged environment. But we don't only want to be able to do that by introducing blended learning or integrating technology into the learning process. We actually want to be able to help to transform the learning. We actually want to be able to change the experience. We want to redefine education. We want to modify, we want to redefine education. What our students are doing today in our classrooms as a result of this is supposed to be able to be way beyond the opportunities that are not there without this. The entire learning process and the entire engagement in learning is going to be redefined if we use this and if we can embrace it fully in a way where it's productive and in a way where we understand that it is a critical tool. And let's not forget, as critical as the tool is, we still are playing a role because I am still going to be the one who's going to be facilitating this process, and we're going to get to that in a moment. So now let's get to some Jewish sources. We've sort of come to this sense that these things are critical, and I'm actually going to start with a strange type of source. When I say strange, I don't mean strange in that sense. What I mean strange is it's not your typical source that you would go to first. And don't worry, I am going to bring some pshat sources and some sources from the original Chumash text and the Mikra text. We will be doing that. But this is a source actually that comes from the Zohar. And the Zohar uses its midrashic or Zohar license to be able to take a simple meaning of a story and put it into a visionary look, put on a visionary lens, as the Zohar is wont to do. And the Zohar takes the pasuk that refers to the opening of the flood, literally the floodgates during the time of Noah, during the time of the flood. And the pasuk tells us that it was in the 600th year of Noah's life when all of the ma'ayanot, all of the wells burst open and the flood began. So the Zohar takes a very, as I said, a very visionary look and says, let's take it out of the realm of the pshat of the story and let's put it into a realm of, into a context of understanding the message. What is the deeper message? What is the visionary message? What is the forward-looking message? Because the Torah is not just going to tell us a history story, but it's also going to give us a forward-looking message. And the Zohar takes it to a very interesting approach and says this 600th year is referring actually to the 600th year of the 6th millennia. And at that time, says the Zohar, the gates of supernal wisdom will open, and then it's at that time that the wells of wisdom in the lower worlds will open. And it's so beautiful because he says the gates of the lower worlds will open and prepare the world for the 7th millennium. The gates of the lower world will open refers to chokhmah l'tata. It's not the worlds, it's the wisdom that will be created in the later generation. What the Zohar is doing for us, what this source is doing for us, is giving us a clear, for lack of a better term, a hechsher. It's giving us the permit. It's giving us permission to be able to take wisdom as it develops through the generations. And for our purpose, let's call it technology, as it develops through the generations. And it allows us to use all of those tools and all of that wisdom that has been generated. And it doesn't matter where the wisdom is generated from, but it allows us to use that wisdom and prepare the world for a new paradigm. And to me, there is nothing that's changing the world into that new paradigm greater than technology. There's nothing that's changed our world of education and our classrooms greater than integrating this new set of wisdom that is still exploding and still growing and moving faster than the rate that we can even breathe and catch up with. And this is the hechsher. This is the permit for us to use it. And not only the permit, but I would almost want to say encouraging us to use it. So then somebody can turn around and say, okay, give me something a little more down to earth. And for that, we'll go to the next source. And the next source is actually a Mishnah. And in the Mishnah is a famous Mishnah from Ethics of Our Father, chapter 12, Pirkei Avot. Kol ma shebarah HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamo lo bra'o elo lechvado. Whatever God created in this world has only been created for His honor. And here the Mishnah is giving us, the Mishnah, this is not Zohar, this is not something that may be obscure or esoteric. The Mishnah is giving us a very, very simple set of instructions. Understand, if there's something in this world that can be used for positive, please use it, because this is part of the glory of God. It's not only that I'm using it because I'm using it, but through using it, I'm actually recognizing and I'm respecting the greatness of God. And if we use technology in the right way, because it is here, then we will be able to benefit from it and also bring, quote unquote, more glory to God, and actually allow our students and allow our generation to actually see values that they were not exposed to and not able to see without this. But let's focus for a moment on why technology. One could say anything that is around is for the glory of God. So what is this focus on technology? And in order to get there, I actually want to look at it, take it for a moment, take you from a different perspective just for a moment. I want to take you from the perspective of the skills that are now prevalent in the 21st century that weren't there just a few years ago. And we're talking about it. This is the topic of conversation among educators almost every day. When a group of educators come together and they talk about this whole new skill set that our students need to have as a result of this new society that we are living in. Everything is changing. We can't be educating our children for a world that is not there anymore. We're educating our children for a world that is there, and for a world that we don't even know, we can't even anticipate what it's going to look like at the rate and the speed that we're going. So what we have to do for a few moments is start looking at some of the new set of skills that are available to us and our children need to be able to begin mastering in order to be able to be successful. Not only successful as citizens, but successful as Jews. Not only successful as Jews, but successful as human beings. And if we look at it from that perspective, I'd like to bring some sources that approach it from that way, and then it'll circle back around to the value of technology and blended learning, because it's only through technology and blending the learning process that we're actually going to be able to give them these opportunities. And what we can't do is leave Judaic studies out of the mix. We can't have them using all of these amazing skills and gaining all these skills just in a world of science. They've got to be able to do it in the world of Chumash, and they've got to be able to do it in the world of Talmud, in the world of Halakha, as well as in the world of science, and they've got to be able to integrate them. So if we look at this, one of the most critical skills that we talk about in 21st century learning is the ability to collaborate. And here I always talk about the irony. One of the things that you'll always hear is the criticism that we are creating a generation that doesn't talk to each other. We're creating a generation of texters, and we're creating a generation where people are just built into themselves and they don't have these social skills. But the irony or the contradiction within that criticism is that actually where you see that technology is being used in a healthy way, and where you see that the technology is being directed in a healthy way, and the etiquette of technology is being created in the right fashion and in the right form, what's actually happening is we're actually training our students to become collaborators. We're actually training our students to actually engage with each other in ways far more advanced than they were able to when they didn't have technology. If you take a blended classroom learning environment, if you take a regular environment and you integrate technology and use it, part of the skills that the students will be required to use is to learn how to collaborate, cooperate, debate, and come to conclusions and discover, not by themselves, but actually by allowing other students, peers, and teachers to be collaborating with them on the same document, on the same exercise, and they're learning a critical skill of being able to interact with each other, which is such an important 21st century skill. And so this brings to mind something, the famous story of Choni HaMa'agal. in the story with Choni HaMa'agal in Ta'anit. After the Talmud tells us the famous story where Choni HaMa'agal was most famous for bringing the rain, the Talmud tells us a midrash about Choni HaMa'agal challenging somebody who was planting a carob tree and challenging him why he's planting it when there is a certain type of carob tree that actually takes 70 or 80 years until it produces fruit. And he said to him, why are you bothering planting a tree that's only going to produce fruit for 70 or 80 years from now? And he said to Choni HaMa'agal, but I want it just like my parents planted for me. I want to plant for my children and my grandchildren. And Choni HaMa'agal sort of in his mind, and you see this image when you look at this midrash in the Talmud, he sort of has in mind this sarcastic thing. Oh yeah, for sure, right? Who's going to gain from it in 70, 80 years? And then the Medrash has this midrashic story where he goes to sleep and he's surrounded by this cave structure, and he falls asleep for 70 years, and then he wakes up. And he wakes up and he starts looking around, and he wants to check out the world. And he comes home and he starts asking them questions, and they start responding to him, and he wants to identify himself and says, "Oh, I'm that guy, I'm that grandfather that you're talking about," and they make a joke of him and they throw him out, and poor Choni HaMa'agal finds himself going from place to place, and finally he arrives in the Bet Midrash. He arrives in the Bet Midrash, and there is a discussion in the Bet Midrash. And a question comes up, and Choni HaMa'agal actually gives a response and says, well, this 70 years ago I had this answer. And he starts telling them that he's Choni HaMa'agal, that the conversation just leads itself from one point to another. And they look at him and they shun him. And then we get to the next slide. And the Gemara comes to the conclusion, O chavruta, O mituta. Choni HaMa'agal turns to God and says, either I can have a friend and socialize, or, God forbid, I'm better off not being here in this world. In this story, the chavruta is a social engagement. In Jewish culture, this O chavruta O mituta, this concept of chavruta, has actually become a critical skill in the process of discovery and the process of learning in Jewish texts and Jewishly in Jewish environments. It's the idea of understanding that in order for us to successfully learn, I have to be able to collaborate with other people. The skill of collaboration that is reached through using technology in the classroom and through blended learning opportunities is actually a skill and a value that is so ingrained in our Masorah. Our entire Talmud, primarily the Babylonian Talmud, is built on conversations, discoveries, explorations, people making mistakes, people being challenged, people being told you're wrong, even people being told tiyufta, major question, major refutation. Isn't it interesting that the Talmud, if there's a major refutation on an opinion, if I was the redactor of the Talmud and would feel that it's not important for people to be able to have make mistakes or come to the wrong conclusions, I would erase it. I would edit it out. The Talmud intentionally didn't erase it. The Talmud intentionally didn't take it out, because it's important for us to know that there is a process that everybody is committed and encouraged to go through. And this journey includes, and has to include, a healthy and robust use of the skill of chavruta, of collaborative learning, not in a social level per se, but in an academic way. So while we are talking about chavruta, we focus on the culture of the classroom and the culture of the learning environment. It then leads us to the million-dollar question for the educator or for the parent. So what's my role now? If it's all about chavruta and it's all about collaborative learning and it's all about discovery, the students discovering, what is my role? Where do I fit into this? And where Jewishly does all of a sudden the educator, the teacher, fit into a new role of facilitator as opposed to just teaching and just giving over information. And even though we're not saying that there isn't a value and there isn't a place for that to take place as well, but on the other hand, we are so strongly encouraging this concept of allowing the students to go through a process of discovery themselves. Where do I fit in, and since when is that allowed? So in order to get there, I want to use the prototype of teachers in our culture. The prototype of teachers in our culture for our next slide is Moshe Rabbeinu. Milanu Gadol Moshe, who is greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. We call him Rabbeinu, our teacher. He is the prototype of our teacher. And then if we go to the next slide, what was the character trait that the Torah found important to tell us about Moshe? Who is Moshe Rabbeinu? Who is our teacher? The first character trait, we hit the next slide, is Anav Mikol Ha'adam. He was the most humble. So the prototype for a teacher is being built for us in front of our eyes. The Torah, the scriptures tell us that the first and most critical element is that you have to be humble. And now we go to the next slide. The next piece, the next adjective that describes the prototype of Moshe Rabbeinu is manhig. He's a leader. He is a leader. So even though he's humble, he still understands his role as a leader. And he's being told that they're not mutually exclusive of each other. That there is a way that you can be humble, and there is a way you can be a leader. There's a way that you can be a leader, and there's a way that you can be humble. And even though it's not germane to our conversation, but we will touch on it for another reason. If we go to the next slide, there is another part of Moshe that we can't ignore, and that is he was a Navi, he was the greatest prophet that ever lived. And the power of prophecy that he had is going to play a role in something else that we can't ignore, which is why I'm mentioning it. But the prototypical teacher, which is being described by Moshe Rabbeinu and by the Torah through Moshe Rabbeinu, is Anav Mikol Adam, most humble, manhig, that he is our leader, and they're not mutually exclusive of each other. So let's have a look at Moshe going to what I call, he's going to Chorev University. He arrives at Mount Sinai, and now he arrives at Mount Sinai. When he arrives at Mount Sinai, when he's shepherding the sheep for his new father-in-law Yitro, he sees the famous vision of the burning bush. And there is this famous conversation and the dialogue between God and between Moshe. God is telling Moshe, I want you to go and take the people out of Egypt. You are the leader. You are my appointed person. Moshe is turning to God and says, Mi anochi, who am I that I should go to Egypt, that I can take the Jewish people out? And there is a very interesting thing that happens at that point. God gives Moshe 3 signs to show him that he will be successful and to show him that he has to go and do the mission. 2 of the signs we're not going to deal with today because they're not going to play a role for us over here, but I'll mention them just for the purpose of getting the whole picture. The 2 signs are, the other 2 signs are, he told him to throw his staff on the ground and it turned to a snake, and then it turned back to a staff, and then he told him to turn the water into blood and the blood back into water. Those 2 signs not only were for Moshe himself, but Moshe was then told in turn to do those signs in front of Pharaoh when he would have an audience with him in Egypt when beginning his mission. However, there was a 3rd sign that God gave Moshe that remained Moshe's alone and was not transferred over to Pharaoh. And for this, if we look at the next slide, let's have a look at the dialogue between Moshe and Hashem on this 3rd sign. Moshe says to God, "V'hei lo ya'aminu li." The Jews are not going to believe me. "V'lo yishma'u lekoli," and they will not listen to my voice. Moshe turns to Hashem and says, Hashem, you have to understand. You're sending me on a mission that is doomed for failure. They're not going to listen to me, and they're not going to believe me. What does Hashem say back to him? And if we can just bring the slides forward for a minute. Hashem says to him, Have na yadcha b'chekech. Put your hand into your chest, into your bosom. Vayavo yado b'cheko vayotzia. He takes his hand out. V'hinei yado b'tzarat Hashem. His hand is full of lepers. And in Jewish tradition, we know that leprosy is a stigma and a plague that is specifically associated with somebody who talks negative about another person that we define as Lashon. So Hashem gave him this sign and then told him, put it back and everything will be good afterwards. But this sign wasn't given over to Pharaoh. This sign was just a conversation, a dialogue between Hashem and Moshe. So what exactly is happening over here? So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and in the next slide I'll have you just read it for a moment. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs puts it into perspective for us. And in addressing who is a leader, if we can see the slide and the next slide, he says, to this, the Jewish answer is one who identifies with his or her people, mindful of their faults to be sure, but convinced also of their potential greatness and their preciousness in the eyes of God. Moshe Rabbeinu is receiving the following, he is getting the following lesson from God. Education 101, Rabbeinu 101, Manhig 101. You have a right to challenge whether you are fitting to do the shlichut, to do the job. You do not have a right not to trust your flock. You do not have a right not to trust that they can be great. You can be mindful of their faults. You can be aware of their faults. But you also have to be convinced of their greatness and their preciousness in the eyes of God. You know what we have to do? We have to learn to trust our children. We have to learn to trust our students. It is a value that God gave over to Moshe and told him as a leader, those are my expectations. I will fear that our students will be engaged in a world of technology that may take our lesson or may take their vision to a new vista that I didn't think about, or they didn't think about, or somebody else in the room didn't think about. Is not a reason not to give the students that opportunity. We have to have faith that they're able to do it. So for that purpose, in the next slide, I actually tried to formulate a run-on sentence, a mini paragraph that needs work, but it just summarizes what we're trying to say and what I believe God is trying to say to Moshe in 21st century language. And he's saying a 21st century educator, and if you want to insert Jewish educator, emulates Moshe by being humble enough to allow a student to discover new boundaries or possibilities or vistas independently, while expressing an intrinsic belief that the student, when guided correctly, is capable of using good decision-making skills while navigating a world of information on the World Wide Web independently. There's so much in this. You have to still be the leader. Nobody's taking away your role as facilitator. Nobody's taking away our role of understanding the needs of our students and understanding what works for them. But what we are being charged with is allow the students to use their innate talents and their innate gifts. Let's hone in on those skills and let them express and let them explore, because we have to trust our children. We have to trust their preciousness in the eyes of God, to use the words of Rabbi Sachs. But then, perhaps one of the obvious next step questions becomes, what is the Jewish source that tells me that I'm supposed to allow students to discover these goals by themselves? I understand that I'm supposed to have trust, and I understand that I'm supposed to be able to see them as precious in the eyes of God and and give a little faith and allow them a little wiggle room, so to speak. But does the Torah encourage me to allow them to discover by themselves? Does the Torah tell me that this is something that they are allowed to do? Are we giving them a license to play God? Are we giving them a license to write the next chapter? Is that something that we are allowed to do? So for this, I actually want to take you into the world of the tablet, not in the technology sense, but in the Jewish sense, the famous Luchot HaBrit in terms of the Ten Commandments and the tablets that were given at Mount Sinai. So if we go to the next slide, we're all familiar with the historical context of two sets of tablets were given to the Jewish people, two Luchot were given to the Jewish people. One set of Luchot were given at the original revelation of Mount Sinai. 49 days the Jews traveled. On the 50th day they arrived in Mount Sinai. Well, they arrived earlier, but on the 50th day they were given the Torah. And everybody's familiar with the story. It's even been put in the movies, right? They worship the golden calf. Moshe is upset. They come down. Moshe destroys the tablets by smashing. Moshe then is instructed by God. He beseeches on behalf of his people, and then he's instructed by God to reinvent the tablets. But this time, God uses the language Sal Lecha. Last time I engraved them, they were a divine miracle. Now I want you to be the one to engrave them. I want man to be able to engrave them. So our rabbis, the sages, actually sort of divide the two sets of tablets into two sets of worlds, so to speak, and two columns. The first set of tablets, and if you look in the middle left box, they were momentary. It was a Sinai experience. They lasted for exactly 40 days. By the time they came down from the mountain, they were smashed. Our rabbis tell us that at that time, since they were divinely created, they represented for us something which we refer to in our literature as Torah Shebechtav, the written Torah. That is the scriptures that we have. It's the written Torah without any explanations and without any color commentary to it. On the other hand, the second set of tablets, something interesting happened. Even though they weren't divinely engraved, they were engraved by a human being, by Moshe. Nevertheless, they remained permanent. They were placed in the Holy Ark in their entirety, together with the broken Luchot, but they were there in their entirety. They didn't break. They remained whole. And our rabbis tell us that the second set of tablets were the license for a new set of a new exposure within Torah for us from God's Torah, and that is what we call the Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's the oral Torah. That's what we call the color commentary. So there's no question over here that there's a different role between the two. The first was a divine experience, and the second is a man-made experience. So what we're seeing over here is something's happening that mankind is doing that's having a permanent, sustainable element to it that wasn't there when something just came from God. But we still have the element of God is watching. God is watching. We still don't have a license to do anything there, even though there is an oral Torah component to it. But the license isn't there yet for us to actually take part in this process. And if we go to the next slide, we expose ourselves for a moment to a pasuk, and I apologize, it's a little small. Lo b'shamayim hi, the Torah is not in heaven. And in this particular source, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel that 3,000 traditional laws were forgotten during the period of mourning for Moses. When Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, the Jews forgot 3,000 of the laws, So they turned to Yehoshua, the next leader, and they said to him, ask. You have a dialogue with God in some way. You're the student of Moshe. Ask. Yehoshua gave them an answer to set the tone and said, HaTorah lo b'shamayim. The Torah is not in heaven. So then they turned to Shmuel, the prophet, and they said to Shmuel, please ask. And Shmuel said, no. These are the commandments implying that no prophet has the right to introduce anything else. So what we see over here is that even though there seems to be a license for Torah Shabbat Peh for an oral law, but the prophet does not have a right to introduce anything new into the process. And all of a sudden over here comes a new idea into the picture. We get out of the realm of Navi, we get out of the realm of prophet, and now we're going into a realm of something that we're all familiar with in Jewish literature, the Chacham, the Talmid Chacham, the wise student, the scholar, the scholarly person. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to see something in front of our eyes that and this source is actually from Maimonides and Jute to the Mishnah, where all of a sudden he takes us into a new level and a new layer. It's true that the prophet does not have a right to bring anything new into the color commentary and into the discussion. But if we go into the realm of sage, if we go into the realm of Talmid Chacham, if we go into the realm of the Chacham scholar, all of a sudden something is going to happen. What's going to happen now is all of a sudden God is giving the Chacham the right to be a participant in the Masorah of Torah. Now it's true that we know that everything that is discovered in Torah has its source from Moses on Mount Sinai. But what's also true is that whatever's being revealed through this scholar is being revealed through this scholar, and it doesn't matter which generation they are. So if I may, for a moment, and we bring up the slide again just to the front, we can see that 1,000 prophets of the stature of Elijah and Elisha were to give one interpretation of the verse, and 1,001 sages were to offer a different interpretation. So even though the prophet should be the one that's giving us the revelation from God, and who cares that they're in a minority, and we should be listening to them, says Maimonides, no, we follow the majority, because the law is in accordance with the 1,001 sages, and not in accordance with the 1,001 prophets. If I can, I want to show you a very powerful slide from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who puts it into the most succinct and beautiful way for us. And this is the power, in my mind, the power of the human student. So if we can bring up the text, we'll be able to see it. And the text of Rabbi Sachs: divine intervention changes nature, that it is human initiative that changes us. This is it in a nutshell. We, our students, need the safety and security to know that they can make change. Human initiative is what's going to change us, and not only is it going to change us, it's encouraged. It's part of the Torah Shabbat. And we can go into a whole polemic and discussion into what the scope of that is and how broad a license that is. And that's for each individual, community to come to that conclusion. However, it's clear that we have the responsibility to give our students some kind of license to be able to be a part of creating a new language, some kind of license to be able to discover things that were not there before. It's here that we get to the essence of everything. The Torah gives us a license to use that which is any tools that we have at our disposal in order to enhance the learning opportunity the Torah gives us the charge to, to follow the ways of Moshe Rabbeinu, to be humble and understand that as a facilitator, I may not be in exact command of everything that's happening, but I'm still setting up the scenes. I'm setting up everything that has to happen, but I'm giving my students the opportunity to gain the skill of collaboration, to gain the safety and security, allowed to discover things, they're allowed to make mistakes, and they're allowed to pick themselves up. And they're also encouraged to be writing the script for the next generation. And we can only do that. And we have the blessing of being able to do that when we have and we encourage blended learning environments. Or at the very least, integrating technology into the culture of our schools and utilizing it and giving our students the opportunity to really, and excuse me for the simple term, give them the opportunity to fly independently and be able to create a beautiful world. And so at this point that I want to practice what we preach, and we're going to allow people to ask questions and participate at any level. All questions are open. It's all part of the discovery process.
Thank you, Rabbi Sufrin, for a rich and multifaceted overview of all of these connections. I was transfixed the whole time, and I think so. We have a couple of minutes, and I guess the question that I'd like to glean from what our viewers have been saying is there are certainly schools that and administrators and teachers, individuals who will just who are just not comfortable with this. It's not in them. And so what do you do? What is there one piece of advice that you would give to someone, a teacher or an administrator, who finds that they are kind of the lone techie, that they're the lone voice advocating for blended learning within a Jewish day school, and they need some chizuk, they need some strengthening and the will to help build that culture in their institution? What advice would you give to someone in that position?
Well, the actual first piece of advice that I can give anybody is actually through living something by setting example. So if I believe in if I'm the lone techie and if I believe in the value, but somehow or other the culture isn't changing around me or it's resisting something around me, then the best way to be able to convince anybody of a value is actually by doing it and producing results. So we can't talk about liking something and not expecting it to be considered a fad if we're not willing to take it to a level of accountability. So if I'm the lone techie and I'm the person who sees its value, then I should begin using it as long as it's within the parameters of the culture. I should begin using it. And then I should be brave enough to invite colleagues into the room and let them see and let them engage and see what's happening and how all of a sudden students that perhaps were not engaged in other settings all of a sudden become engaged, or let them see the excitement of the discovery. There is 100% clear difference when you walk into a room where technology is being integrated into the learning and it's natural and it's part of the DNA of the culture. The engagement and the excitement of the students and the electricity in the room is so visible and it can be felt. So my advice to that person is start doing it and invite one person in at a time. Invite them in one at a time. Be brave enough, let them come in and let them feel the same electricity and the same energy, and it spreads. It's like a virus, a healthy virus.
Beautiful. Well, I hope that our lone techies heard your voice and heard your message, and that all of our viewing audience enjoyed our conversation today and got something out of it. I hope you'll try something new. I hope you'll deepen these conversations in your schools. Gary of Digital J Learning, any last thoughts to share with our viewers?
No, just thank you, Rabbi Sufrin, for really an inspirational talk, and for sharing something with us that I think we can all learn from regardless of where we are, what level we're at of tech integration, or how much of a scholar we are or aren't. I think there's something here for everybody to benefit. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your perspective with us.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks for allowing me to participate.
Excellent. So for everyone out there, the recording of this video will be available momentarily, and the good folks at Digital J Learning are going to be putting together a series of discussion questions for you to use this video in your settings, with your teachers, with your fellow colleagues, to really deepen that discussion. And I'm sure we'll hear more from Rabbi Sufrin and from Harkham Hillel Hebrew Academy, and more on blended learning and Jewish values. I think it's a really interesting and important conversation, and there's so much more to say. So keep the conversation going, and we'll see you all again soon. Have a happy Pesach soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.